Asher and Olivia had been together for 5 years. Recently, Asher got a promotion at work, which, while exciting, meant he started spending a lot more time on the job and frequently going on short business trips. Olivia wasn't thrilled about how little time they were now spending together. Sure, those trips brought in decent money, especially for their town, but what kind of relationship is it when a couple barely sees each other? She missed the attention from her husband terribly, and often when he finally got home, he was so exhausted he just collapsed. There was no time for heart-to-heart talks, or even just a simple "How was your day?" Around that time, Olivia got a new colleague at work, Matthew. He was young, full of energy, and it didn't take long before he started showing an interest in Olivia that went far beyond just friendly or professional. Olivia had almost forgotten what it felt like to be pursued by a man, and as much as she enjoyed the attention, she didn't let things go too far. After all, she was a married woman. For months, they just talked and got to know each other. Matthew turned out to be a fascinating, deep person, and their conversations grew more frequent, spilling over into social media and becoming more personal, even a bit intimate. Then, Asher left for another business trip. Olivia found herself at home on a day off, bored out of her mind with nothing to do. She started messaging Matthew, who always seemed to know how to lift her spirits. When she complained about being bored out of her skull, he suggested they catch a movie together. "There's this new comedy that just came out. Wanna go?" he asked. Olivia didn't reply for a while, caught up in how it might look. A married woman going to the movies with another man. It didn't seem right. But then she reasoned with herself. They were just friends, and Matthew was saving her from an otherwise dull evening. This wasn't a date, not at all. With that justification, Olivia agreed to Matthew's offer. Throughout the evening, he acted like a perfect gentleman, never overstepping any boundaries. After the movie, they took a brief stroll in the park, and then Matthew offered to drive Olivia home. By the time they reached her house, it was already quite late. He playfully asked if she'd invite him in for some tea, and out of politeness, she agreed. That decision turned out to be a big mistake. As she put the kettle on and started offering different types of tea, Matthew's eyes landed on a bottle of wine sitting on one of the shelves. "Olivia, it's been such a lovely evening. How about we end it on a high note with some wine?" he suggested with a sly smile. A few glasses later, their conversation drifted far from friendly territory. Matthew began showering her with compliments, even wrapping her in warm embraces. He told her how beautiful she was, how he'd fallen for her at first sight, and how much he'd been looking forward to their time together. At some point, Olivia felt a pang in her chest. She'd missed hearing these kinds of words, especially from her husband, who was always so consumed by work. The alcohol and Matthew's flattery started to get to her, and before long, thoughts of her husband and the consequences of her actions slipped away entirely. That night, everything happened right there in the apartment she shared with Asher. Having felt starved for male attention and affection, Olivia let herself be swept up by Matthew. And he didn't disappoint. He gave her the most intense, passionate night she'd ever experienced. Not even with her husband had she reached such heights of bliss. Again and again. Exhausted and satisfied, they eventually fell asleep in the early hours of the morning. When Olivia woke up and saw she wasn't alone in bed, panic set in. What had she done? How could she betray her husband like this? The saying, "a starved gap will not lead to good," hit her with full force. She sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring blankly at nothing. When Matthew finally woke up and joined her, instead of a kiss or a cheerful good morning, he was met with something entirely different. Olivia, now full of regret, told him that last night had been a mistake, one she deeply regretted. "Just tell your husband about it and come to me," he said, genuinely baffled by her sudden change of heart. "I can't do that. Please, just go, she replied, her voice heavy with remorse. For the next 2 weeks, Olivia cut off all communication with Matthew. The guilt was eating her alive, and she finally realized just how much Asher meant to her. When he returned from his business trip, she couldn't get enough of him. She became more attentive, constantly reminding him of her love. She decided she would never confess to her infidelity. She knew it would destroy him. But fate had other plans. One day, Olivia came home from work and found Asher in the kitchen, sitting in front of a glass and a large stack of papers. Her heart started racing. Something was definitely wrong. At first, she thought it might be work-related, but as she got closer, she saw what the papers were: printed copies of her messages with Matthew. And like a cruel cherry on top, there was a photo resting on one of the stacks, her half-naked, peacefully asleep in bed. After that passionate night when she cheated on Asher, Matthew couldn't handle the rejection from Olivia, so he decided to spill everything to her husband. It's hard to put into words what Asher felt when he found that large envelope on his doorstep. He was puzzled, not expecting anything from anyone. Curiously, he opened it, and the first thing he saw was the printed photo of Olivia. The ground nearly gave way beneath him. He quickly retreated to the kitchen, sat down, and emptied the contents of the envelope onto the table. There were quite a few pages. By the third page, he couldn't read any more without a drink, so he pulled out a bottle of strong liquor. By the time he'd finished reading all the messages between his wife and her lover, Olivia had come home. She tried to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but Asher barely seemed to hear her. The only thing spinning in his mind was why? How? Finally, when Olivia's desperate sobs became too much, he spoke in a dark, almost empty voice. Pack your things and just leave. There's nothing more to say. Olivia, her face streaked with tears, fell silent and went to grab her suitcase. For several days, Asher drowned his thoughts in alcohol, trying to make sense of it all. But eventually, he realized nothing would fix this. The marriage was over. He couldn't forgive her. Not now. Probably not ever. So he filed for divorce. Olivia, to her credit, didn't try to claim anything that wasn't hers. She also made it a point to stay out of Asher's sight. He did not seek revenge. It was not in his nature to waste time on such trifles. In addition, he believed that she would have to come to terms with the fact that she had been unfaithful, and this burden would accompany her in any future relationship.